what
Okay.
you might do. Okay, so let's say we create, you can see my screen, right?
Yes.
Let's say we create a job for a customer. And of course you can create the RA first. You can either create the RA and then generate a job, or you can generate a job and then add the RA. It doesn't matter which way you do it, okay? So let's say we put it on this piece of equipment. Okay, and we say, you know, something is wrong with it. And then we say to them, okay, well, we'll generate an RA for you to send the equipment in. So at this point, you go ahead and you create a customer RA. So if you're on the equipment record here, you can say add to customer RA. It's going to show you the customer and the job and the equipment. So we go ahead and accept that. And so that's the customer RA has been generated. At that point, that is linked under here as a customer RA. Now, the next step in their workflow was, let's say they received it. Okay? So each piece of equipment on the RA has a status of whether it's been returned and receipted. So you can see up the top here, we have this receipt return. So what we would say is, all right, we're receipting it. So it's physically arrived in our building, right? That's what we're marking it off here as. Inside the equipment record, there's a bunch of information in here you can use, like in testing, you know, they can put a status of it when it's in the RA saying, you know, testing to determine, you know, they can have their own statuses here, for example. Now, let's say at this point, they determine that they need to send it to the vendor. So what they can do then is create a vendor RA from this customer RA. So basically what's happening now is you're linking those two together. So if I do that, choose my vendor, for example, choose my customer RA and link them together. So now this equipment is on a vendor RA as well. Now you'll see that the vendor RA has the same buttons, but they're in a different order. The idea being that you return it to the vendor and then you receipt it back. So the equipment can be on both a customer RA and a vendor RA at the same time. So I would return it to the vendor. This is me shipping it to my vendor, obviously. A week, 2 weeks, whatever goes by. And you can see over here it came from, you can see this field here, it came from that RA. A couple of weeks go by, the vendor sends it back, so I receipt it. And that's going to complete the vendor RA. You see this vendor RA is now marked as complete. So at that point, I can go back to my customer RA and now I can return the equipment back to the customer. And now the customer RA is complete. And all of this has been happening underneath the job here. So at this point on the job now, I would do what I would normally do, you know, add some billing, add some charges, whatever I need to do. But that's basically how the RA process works. So you would normally create the job, then you have your customer RA, which you generate from the job. Then if you want to send it back to the vendor, you generate a vendor RA from the customer RA. And understand that if you sort of think of the workflow, I'll just type it out here. You've got job, then you've got customer, RA, receipt, equipment, okay, create vendor RA, ship equipment to vendor, receive equipment back from vendor. Now we're back here. return equipment to customer, close customer RA, invoice on job. Does that make sense?
Yes. There where you have ship equipment to vendor in service manager terminology, that's return it to the vendor?
Correct. So ship is marked as a return.
Okay.
Vendor.
Okay.
But obviously, you're sending it to your vendor. But in our terminology, there's the return button and a receipt button. And then in here, there's a receipt and a return button. They're just in opposite workflows, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's going the other way.
Yeah, so it's pretty easy, and you can always look at your vendor RA, you see it was linked from a customer RA, so on and so forth. So you have all of the links there. Obviously, that means it's in the database, so from a reporting point of view or anything like that, you could always pull them out and say, show me all my customer RAs that we then sent to the vendor, that sort of thing. You've got all the data links there for you to be able to do that. So now only the customer RA does appear inside the job, though. That's just one thing to remember, because this job's obviously for that customer. And of course, equipment history would show them both.
So if they wanted the quickest way to look at a vendor site to see what all equipment is currently at the vendor for repair, is there an inquiry that I could do to filter on that?
I mean, you can go directly to RA here, and obviously you can search here. Well, that's a customer RA, I'm sorry. I can open up my vendor RAs, put in my vendor number here, and get a list of all the current RAs open for that vendor. Having said that, then you'd still be looking through each of them individually to try to determine that. So that's probably a bit not super useful. So at that point, you would probably be better off running the RA report. And so in here, you can say a vendor RA, for a specific vendor, and then you could say include all the equipment details and get sort of a list of all the outstanding ones. There's no inquiry screen as such.
Okay. So include returns, that would be the ones that we've returned to the vendor.
Yes.
And if we included receipts, that would also include the ones we've also gotten back. So just include returns would be only the ones
that are currently outstanding. Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. So because you've got to think about the total RA has a status, open, close, that sort of thing, but it could have 10 equipment on that one RA, and some of them could be back, some of them could not be. So you have individual line status and then the overriding status, okay? So you've got the RA state here, current or historic, then the statuses of the RAs. So you would obviously probably not show complete because, they're complete. That means all the lines on there have already been returned. And then inside you could say, include the returns but not the receipts, because then you'd be getting all the RAs that are open. And even if those RAs, let's say there was 10 of them, and they all had 10 lines, so that's 100 lines. If 30 of the lines had been returned, you'd only get 70 in the report, e.g. the outstanding ones.